either ours or the years of our children or our grandchildren. And most of us remember that those years were good, but sometimes difficult. However, teenage years are much more difficult for young people who are struggling not only to learn who they are, but to learn what their sexual identity is. Stay with us today on Austin Faith Dialogue as we talk about that search during the teenage years.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
We're glad you joined us today for Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Sandy Wilder, your host, and as we talk about the search in the teenage years, we'll be talking today with Jeff Lutz, who's with an organization called Out Youth Austin. Welcome, Jeff. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm glad to be here.
Now, my hunch is a lot of people don't know what Out Youth Austin is, so let's talk a little bit about the ministry of the organization first.
Okay, sure. Out Youth Austin is an organization whose mission is to promote the mental, physical, and emotional well-being of sexual minority youth so that they can explore and affirm their identities.
And how long ago was the organization formed, and out of what sort of need did Out Youth come into being?
Well, in about 1990, there were several high school students that approached a couple of social workers here in town, Lisa Rogers and J. Irwin Grotsky, who then became the co-founders of this organization because the high school students talked to them at length about some of the difficulties that they were experiencing in their school. The school for them was a place where there was a great deal of harassment because they were different and not seen as like the other kids. And they talked to these social workers about the lack of services, the lack of places that they could go for support and talk about who they are and how they feel and some of their triumphs as well as their difficulties. So that was what kind of led up to the formation of the organization.
And your relationship with Out Youth Austin is?
Well, I have the honor of serving on the board of directors, and I was the past chair, and I've gladly given those duties to someone else, but I'm happy to still serve on the board.
And Out Youth, then, what kind of services does it provide for young people?
Okay. Well, in order to accomplish our mission, we provide a number of different services. We have a drop-in center, which is basically a large space with comfortable furniture and books and TV and VCR and stereo and board games. That drop-in center is open 5 nights a week, Wednesday through Sunday nights, from 5:30 to 9:30. And we have activities planned most of the evenings. Youth can come and be a part of those activities, or they can just come and do their homework. They can watch TV, they can talk to other youth, they can talk to volunteers, and just socialize and be in a place where they're understood and know that they're not alone.
So you've got a drop-in center, and then what else?
In addition to the drop-in center, we have one of only 2 national helplines. And our helpline is staffed 7 days a week from 5:30 to 9:30, and we get calls from all over the country from youth. We don't even know how they get our number because as a small organization, we don't really have the funds to advertise very much, but thank goodness somehow these youth in need or youth in crisis get our number and they call us. So typically, well, for instance, a couple weeks ago, we got a call from a boy named Mark in Kentucky, a small town in Kentucky, and he was in a $20 a room, $20 a night hotel room, feeling suicidal, considering suicide because he had just been kicked out of his home. His parents had found out that he was gay, and his father had said something that we hear quite a bit, which was, "You're no longer my son as far as I'm concerned. I no longer have a son. I don't want to see you anymore." And of course, he didn't know where to turn and what to do in this small town. And so we have trained volunteers, people from the community who care about this issue, who go through a series of training to man that helpline and take those calls.
7 nights a week, you
7
said?
nights a week.
Okay.
And we get about 1,500 calls a month. So the good news is, in a certain way, that we're glad to be there and provide that service to that many people in need. Of course, the downside is those calls cost on the average about $1 a call. So our phone bill runs in the neighborhood of about $1,500 a month.
And one of only 2 in the country. So
One of only 2 in the country.
You're sort of a model, perhaps, for other communities, right?
That's right. That's right. In addition to the helpline and the drop-in center, we have support groups that run on Wednesday and Sunday evenings. And we also have a program called GAUDI, which the kids came up with, and it just stands for Gay and Wonderfully Diverse Youth.
Great acronym.
Right. The kids came up with it, and it basically is a program for the creative arts. So once a week they get together and they write poetry, or they write short stories, or they put together short skits. And it's really a medium for them to express themselves. You know, sometimes all of us, especially youth, are a bit hesitant to talk about how we feel and talk about some of our fears. But through these creative arts, they really open up and have a good time in the process. So it's a really positive place to be.
Sounds like. Of course, you know, Jeff, there are plenty of people who have had trouble with the whole notion of homosexuality anyway.
Sure.
What would you say, as a person actively involved in Out Youth Austin, about, in light of that kind of feeling, what the need is for the services you all provide?
Well, because there are so many people that feel that way, it just increases the need for a program like this. In fact, what many of our volunteers say is our fundraising would no longer be a problem if we had $1 for every person who said, gee, I wish there was a program like this when I was 15. Because many of our adult volunteers remember that process when they were growing up and not feeling like there was some place that they could turn to. So it's a much needed service because of the oppression and the bigotry that some of these kids are exposed to at school and at church and sometimes in their families and among friends. I took a couple of friends a few years ago to a series of hearings that the city had, the Human Rights Commission, to look into the issues that surround gay and lesbian youth and whether or not the schools should be doing more to support those youth. And my friends, a heterosexual couple that were going with me, they said, Jeff, you know, we want to go with you and we support whatever you're involved in, but frankly, we don't quite understand why this is such a big deal and why there would need to be a program for youth like this. And we got to the hearing, and there were a number of people from all walks of life that got up and really were supportive of services for gay and lesbian youth. But there were also a number of people from a number of churches around town who got up and spoke vehemently and with a lot of anger. I'll even use the word, it really felt like hatred about, and several of the kids got so upset that they began to cry and got up and left. And after we left the hearing, my friend said to me, now we understand. Now we get it, why there's such a need for a program like Out Youth. We had no idea that this is what the kids were exposed to.
Well, it sounds like then that gay and lesbian youth are at greater risk. I mean, the teenage years are difficult anyway. What are some of the other risks that the kids might run?
Well, there have been several studies over the years, and we know that gay and lesbian youth are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than their non-gay counterparts. And, you know, what we need to remember is whether you agree with the concept of homosexuality or not, gay kids aren't just a number, they're not just a statistic, they are somebody's son or daughter or brother or sister, and nobody wants kids to die, anybody with a heart. And so given statistics like that, these services are vital.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned schools, because of course at that age most young people are in school. Are there any particular links, let's say, that Out Youth Austin has with area schools?
Yes, we have been active with a couple of other programs in town. For instance, PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays,
Mm-hmm.
and GLSEN, which I can't remember what that stands for, but it's basically a organization for teachers and educators who are concerned about some of the issues that gay and lesbians face, gay and lesbian teenagers. And those two organizations, along with Out Youth, have been fairly vocal in our community, and we've been successful in getting some support groups up and running in a few of the high schools, although we would like to see that happen in all of the high schools.
Right.
Because these kids they're physically beaten up by other kids at school. They're find nasty notes attached to their locker. They're verbally harassed, and of course no kid needs to be exposed to that during those formative years.
Right. High school sometimes wasn't a safe place anyway.
Right.
Much less if you're being attacked for who you are.
Right.
Okay. Briefly here before the break, say something about the budget for Out Youth Austin. Where does the support come from?
Well, it mostly comes from the support of people in the community who care about this issue and who care about youth in general and want to make sure that we form a sense of community and provide a place of safety for all youth. So we rely on donations. We do several fundraisers each year, but for the most part, the funds come from those who care.
For your staff, your programs, and for the site, right? Because you do operate out of a specific site that's just yours.
Right, right.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a short break here to tell folks a little bit about Austin Metropolitan Ministries, and we'll come back and continue our conversation. Stay with us as we keep talking about the services provided by Out Youth Austin.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
We've been talking so far today with Jeff Lutz of Out Youth Austin, and we continue our conversation with you, Jeff, and talking about the work of Out Youth Austin, reaching out to teenagers basically in crisis as they work through their sexual identity in the teenage years. And our listeners are particularly interested in theological questions, since this is Austin Faith Dialogue. I wonder if you can say a bit about where the young people who come asking for help or asking for a safe place, where they seem to be in their spiritual development.
Sure. Well, you know, Sandy, I guess I would start by answering that question by telling you that I was raised in a Southern Baptist church myself. My mother was a Sunday school teacher and my father a deacon, and was very involved in the church growing up. And there are a lot of youth at Out Youth who have a similar background. The problem is at some point they begin to feel that their sexuality and spirituality are at odds. And although there is a part of them that very much wants to stay connected to the church and very much wants to believe in God and be a part of the spiritual community, they struggle to find a place where they can go and do that and be who God created them to be. They feel like they have to hide, that they have to keep a secret. So one of the things that we try to do at Out Youth is just expose them to all the options that are available in our community, and to also try to dispel some of the myths that their homosexuality and their spirituality can't go hand in hand, because they believe it's one or another. And most of them have tried to the point that they're suicidal to not be gay anymore. They've tried to oppress and squash their sexuality, and they've realized that they can't do that any more than someone could squash or oppress their heterosexuality. And so when they get to that point, they're really in need of people who can let them know that it's okay and that there are people in God's community that love them just as who they are.
Help them understand, I guess, that they are still people of worth, to use that theological phrase, right?
Right.
Now, what connections does Out Youth have, if any, say, with local churches? Because I imagine it's good to keep youth in their high schools as well as in their churches, if possible.
Yes. Well, again, let me say, as much as I love the church and being a member of a wonderful church here in town, unfortunately, church is the place where a lot of these kids have been hurt the most. And so when we find churches that are open to the issues that gay and lesbian youth face, that's wonderful. There are very few, unfortunately. We are fortunate to be supported by Metropolitan Community Church of Austin, has been very supportive over the years, both financially as well as allowing us to have our drop-in center on site. And they are very much behind our mission, as well as the new Cornerstone Community Center.
Okay, so there are a few safe places.
Right.
Right. Now, do you do any work then with local clergy, say educational settings or in workshop settings or anything like that?
Yes, our program director, Lisa Rogers, is quite active and talks frequently to some ministers here in town. A few names that come to mind: Jim Rigby, Sid Hall, and their congregation seem very concerned and very interested in helping gay and lesbian youth. And so Lisa's very involved and in dialogue with them consistently.
Okay. Say something about then how people of faith themselves plug into the work of Out Youth Austin. You know, are they volunteers or what are they doing?
We have a number of opportunities. Of course, we would appreciate any financial support that people are able to offer. But in addition to financial support, there are a lot of ways that people can volunteer. In fact, we have a volunteer training that's coming up starting this weekend. And so if people are interested in being a volunteer with Out Youth or finding out more about Out Youth, they can call 708-1234, which is the number to Out Youth, and we will be glad to give them the information about the services that we provide and our training opportunities.
As you on the board, you and the other board members sit and sort of dream about the future for the organization, where do you see Out Youth growing? What is sort of a direction it needs to go in?
Well, it's an interesting question that you would ask me, because our board has been involved for several months now with some value development. We've had some consultants that have come in and really helped us take a look at what is the mission of Out Youth and where do we want to be in 5 years. And we're still very much working on that. But I guess in general, I would say that we want to be able to provide even more services to this population. We want to, in addition to that, do what we can to help make the community at large a safer place. And that includes the churches and the schools.
Do you see perhaps helping other Out Youth projects develop in other communities, for instance?
Well, we have had the privilege of being involved in that to some degree, and we would love to do more of that. We routinely get calls from all over the country who have heard about people who have heard about Out Youth and would like to start something in their local communities, and we are certainly more than willing to let them know what we've learned over the years, the ups and downs and the struggle in doing a nonprofit organization like this.
Are there ways in which the Austin community, not only the faith community, but the secular community too, are unique in terms of how it responds to the work of Out Youth?
Well, I think that compared to a lot of cities and a lot of towns, Austin is probably a lot more supportive in some areas. Now, we certainly have people that oppose what we do, and but I think compared to a lot of cities, Austin is very supportive as a whole. And that's why I think the helpline is so important, because many of the kids that call are from cities that are not supportive.
Do you ever hear from your graduates, now that Out Youth has been in operation for a number of years, and what do they say?
Yes, well, many of these kids are very bright and articulate, and they will go off to school. We've had kids that have moved to Boston and just all over the place, and gone to graduate school after going to undergraduate, and they often send us postcards and letters and pictures and copies of things they've written and accomplishments if they've been in the newspaper, and they will often tell us that had it not been for Out Youth, they would have never known that they had enough worth, enough self-esteem to accomplish their professional and personal goals. And so that's very gratifying to get those kinds of letters.
Nice testimony.
Yes.
And what do you hear from some of the families of the youth that you work with? Do you hear that same kind of support?
That varies. We, of course, have some families who are not supportive, and again, that's one of the reasons that Out Youth exists. But we often have families who are supportive, or we have families who aren't quite for sure what this is all about, and once they see the self-esteem development of their kids, they really come on board and are eager to help out in any way that they can. And we have a handful of parents who are now very active with Out Youth because they've seen how this promotes the well-being and the self-esteem of their kids.
Right, right. And suppose a young person is having a spiritual crisis. Is that crisis then handled by people just on staff? Are you able to refer them to people out in the community? How does that work?
Well, again, we're very fortunate to be officed in the same area as some of the Metropolitan Community Church of Austin offices, so we certainly can refer or have those folks be involved. But we also want to honor the faith tradition that each youth might have come out of. And so depending on what that is and what they believe and what their values are, we try to find folks in the community that would be willing to help them.
Do you find any particular sharp differences in the population you serve? Like, are there more men than women? Are there more Anglo students than African American students? I mean, sort of, how does that break out in terms of who's responding to Out Youth?
That's a good question, and I'm not for sure exactly how to answer that. I think that in general, we get kids from all walks of life. We have some kids that come to us from Austin High and some of the more prominent high schools in town, and then we have a large number of African American and Hispanic kids that come to us as well. So I think we sort of have kids from all walks of life.
And I guess that assumes all faith traditions too, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Sounds like Out Youth is a good model for how to get along across boundaries then.
Well,
right?
that's part of our mission. We really want to be a part of building a sense of community.
And so if the Austin community were to get involved, you said that volunteers are always welcome. What are some of the other needs?
Well, in addition to volunteering and into financial support, we're often in need of supplies, computers, TVs. One of our dreams is to have a more well-developed computer system so that the kids could come up and do their homework and learn how to use computers and learn how to use email to talk with other kids in similar programs like this in other cities, to be able to access things that are of an interest and educational value to them. So we're often in need of those kinds of supplies.
So basically just call.
They could call and we would be able to tell them exactly what we need.
And if you had one dream for Out Youth, what would your one dream be?
For it not to need to exist anymore.
Say a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, ideally, it would be great if there didn't need to be organizations like Out Youth, if the world were the kind of place where the churches and the spiritual community and the schools understood this issue and created a safe environment so that all kids, whether they're heterosexual, homosexual, black, white, regardless of their faith tradition, were accepted. And then I think that we would all be very happy in a certain way if we got the world to be that kind of place and sort of dismantled the organization or changed it into something else.
So ultimately, it would be good to go out of business.
That's right. That's right. How many places can say that?
Not very many.
Right.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for the conversation about Out Youth and for the work that you do in trying to create a safe space for these kids and helping them understand that they too are children of God.
Yes.
It's important work.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Cindy, for giving me the opportunity to be here.
You bet. And we appreciate those of you who've joined us today to hear about this important ministry, Out Youth Austin, which can help kids in some really troubled times. We hope that your church, too, is a safe space for your young people. But more than that, we hope you'll join us again for Austin Faith Dialogue next week.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.